The Young and the Restless spoilers. When Claire arrived in Los Angeles, there was a quiet tension surrounding her that few could name but everyone could feel. She had left behind the fragile image of the sweet and confused young woman who once seemed lost in the shadows of the Newman family name. The air of innocence that once softened her words and movements was gone. What emerged in its place was something colder, more deliberate, and dangerously controlled. Her breakup with Kyle was the first visible crack in that transformation, but to those who watched closely, it was not heartbreak that drove her, it was liberation. In leaving him, Claire shed the last restraint that had tethered her to reason. The gentle rhythm of Genoa City, the expectations of decency, and the facade of redemption all fell away like dead leaves. By the time she reached Los Angeles, she was a different creature entirely, one who looked at the world not with love or regret but with calculation. It was there that she found Holden, or perhaps it was Holden who found her, drawn to her broken brilliance like a moth to a flame that promised both warmth and destruction. He saw in her something familiar, the hunger for control masked as freedom, the need to destroy as a means to feel alive. Their connection did not blossom in affection but ignited in mutual chaos. Together, they built a strange kind of partnership, one fueled by shared secrets, whispered ambitions, and a promise to never be ordinary again. At first, their meetings seemed harmless, late-night conversations in dimly lit rooms where plans were more fantasy than reality. But something darker began to take root when the name Noah started appearing in their conversations. Noah, who had once been a symbol of light and renewal, became an obsession for reasons that even they could not fully articulate. Holden saw him as an obstacle, the embodiment of everything he would never be, respected, loved, and capable of starting over. Claire's feelings were more twisted, part jealousy, part vengeance, part the cruel curiosity of watching something pure decay under her influence. The whispers about a third presence behind them grew louder in the city's rumor mills, Sienna. Some said Sienna had planted the idea in their minds, others that she had been pulling their strings for months, using her influence and charm to orchestrate chaos from the shadows. The idea that she might be the real mastermind gave everything an even more sinister edge. Sharon, ever the quiet observer of human nature, sensed that something about Claire and Holden's sudden alliance did not fit. She had known pain well enough to recognize when someone was masking it behind control. But what unsettled her most was not the pain, it was the pleasure Claire seemed to take in her new persona. Sharon began to follow her instincts, the same instincts that had saved her countless times before, tracing movements, noticing inconsistencies, and connecting small details that others dismissed as coincidence. Her search led her to a remote property on the outskirts of the city, a place that seemed to exist outside time itself, a forgotten house with a locked basement and a silence that felt alive. The locals whispered about it, claiming it was once used for film storage or secret research, but whatever it had been, now it belonged to Claire and Holden. Night after night, Sharon watched from a distance, hiding behind walls and fences, her breath slow and careful, her heart pounding with both fear and a strange sense of duty. The first time she saw them enter the basement, she thought they were merely hiding something, maybe stolen files, maybe a recording meant to blackmail someone. But what she eventually saw went far beyond that. The basement was not a refuge, it was a sanctuary of madness. Each night, as darkness swallowed the streets, Claire and Holden would arrive, their steps synchronized, their expressions blank yet purposeful. Inside that dimly lit space, with walls covered in maps, photos, and hand-drawn diagrams, they sat across from Sienna. The atmosphere was ritualistic, three people connected by the kind of trust that only shared guilt could create. Sharon, hidden behind the door, could barely process what she was seeing. The air in that room felt heavy with malice and intent. Sienna was calm, almost regal, her presence commanding as she laid out plans with surgical precision. Claire nodded, her once soft eyes now cold mirrors reflecting Sienna's venom, while Holden scribbled notes, his trembling hands betraying both excitement and fear. On the table were pictures of Noah, candid shots taken from a distance, snapshots of his routine, his friends, the places he frequented. It was not a coincidence, it was surveillance. Sharon's stomach turned as realization dawned. they were plotting something irreversible, something deadly. What horrified Sharon most was not just the plot itself but how ordinary it all seemed to them. They laughed occasionally, not with joy but with the kind of sick humor that thrives in darkness. They treated the idea of ending a life as if it were a business strategy, something to be executed cleanly and efficiently. Sienna appeared to be the mind, Holden the hands, and Claire the face, the one who would charm her way close enough to ensure everything went according to plan. Sharon could not understand why Noah was their target, but she suspected it had to do with more than jealousy. Perhaps Noah had stumbled upon something, evidence, a secret, or a connection between Holden and Sienna's dealings that he wasn't supposed to know. The more Sharon pieced together, the clearer it became that this was not an impulsive act but a carefully designed operation with layers of deceit. Every instinct in her screamed to call for help, but Sharon knew that exposing them without proof would make her look paranoid, even unstable. She had learned long ago that in a world ruled by power and perception, the truth was worthless unless it came with evidence. So she waited, night after night, collecting fragments, overheard words, photographs of car plates, times, and patterns. What she uncovered in those weeks shook her faith in humanity itself. Sienna, who had once appeared as a calculating but business-minded woman, was far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Her reach extended far beyond the personal. She had ties to corporate manipulations, backdoor deals, and connections that blurred the lines between power and crime. Claire was her perfect weapon, a woman shaped by trauma, molded by manipulation, and unleashed when the time was right. Holden, in turn, was the pawn who thought himself a knight, willing to destroy anything to feel significant. The more Sharon learned, the more she realized how deep the web went. It wasn't just about Noah. It was about control, of people, of narratives, of power itself. Sienna's obsession with dismantling the Newman influence in Los Angeles was personal, a vendetta disguised as strategy. She had waited for years, collecting broken souls like Claire and Holden, feeding their anger and shaping their purpose. What terrified Sharon most was how easily such control could take root. Watching Claire that night, her posture confident, her laughter low and chilling, Sharon saw not the lost girl she once pitied but a mirror of Sienna's own darkness. When Sharon finally gathered the courage to confront what she had seen, it was already too late. The plan was in motion. Noah had begun to feel eyes on him, strange calls, unmarked envelopes, and a growing sense of unease he couldn't explain. Claire appeared occasionally, pretending concern, offering small gestures of comfort while secretly tracking his every move. Holden watched from the shadows, and Sienna coordinated from a distance, ensuring no mistake could trace back to her. Sharon, desperate, knew she had to act without being noticed. She spent sleepless nights recording, writing notes, building a case no one had asked for. The city outside continued its rhythm, glamorous, loud, oblivious, while beneath it all, a storm brewed in silence. In those final nights before everything fell apart, Sharon returned once more to the basement. This time, she brought a camera, her hands trembling as she pressed record. She watched through the small crack in the door as the three conspirators finalized their arrangement. Claire, radiant in her cruelty, spoke with precision about timing, about how fear worked best when the victim trusted the hand that delivered it. Holden nodded, lost in her spell, and Sienna leaned forward, her voice soft but deadly, sealing the fate of a man who had done nothing but stand in their way. Sharon felt her breath catch. The moral line between observer and participant blurred as she realized that by watching, by knowing, she had already become part of it. By the time she left, the night air felt suffocating, thick with secrets and dread. She knew that confronting them meant risking everything, her reputation, her safety, perhaps even her sanity. But she also knew that silence was complicity, and she could not let Noah become another victim of the darkness she had witnessed. The next morning, when she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw a woman afraid of the past. She saw someone prepared to face monsters, even if it meant exposing her own. Yet as she stepped out into the sunlight, somewhere deep down, Sharon knew that what she had seen in that basement was not the end of the story, it was only the beginning of something far more terrifying. A revelation that the real danger was not just in what people did in the dark, but in how easily they learned to live with it. Sharon could hardly comprehend the weight of what she had heard that night, the cold precision with which Claire and Sienna spoke about ending not only Noah's life but Victor's as well. It was no longer about jealousy or betrayal, it was about annihilation. The basement that had once seemed like a hidden corner of madness now felt like the center of something vast and malevolent, a place where hatred had been cultivated and sharpened into strategy. Sharon left that night in a daze, her mind replaying every word, every glance exchanged between the three conspirators. It made no sense at first. Why would Claire, the woman rumored to be Victoria's daughter, turn against her own bloodline with such venom? Why would she align herself with Sienna, a manipulator whose power thrived on the collapse of others? And why was Holden so devoted, willing to stain his hands for a cause that was not his own? None of it added up until Sharon began to connect the whispers that had once seemed like gossip, the story that maybe, just maybe, Claire wasn't who she claimed to be. As she delved deeper, Sharon found traces in old files, private reports, and fragments of hospital records that had long been sealed. The details were inconsistent, the timelines overlapping, and the signatures missing. It was as if someone had carefully rewritten Claire's origins, replacing one name with another. The more Sharon searched, the clearer it became that the story of Claire being Victoria's daughter had been a fabrication, a carefully crafted narrative meant to give her access to the Newman circle. If that were true, then who was she really? The answer came slowly, through the painful recollection of an old enemy long thought gone, Jordan, a woman whose cruelty had carved deep scars into the Newman family years ago. Jordan, who had once manipulated minds, stolen identities, and used family bonds as weapons. Sharon began to wonder if Claire was the product of that legacy. Not Victoria's child but Jordan's, raised or programmed to infiltrate and destroy the very family that had brought her mother down. This possibility chilled Sharon to the core. It explained everything, the charm, the manipulation, the lack of empathy beneath Claire's soft exterior. Claire was not lost, she was engineered. Sienna, seeing an opportunity, must have found her and fed that dormant hatred until it became purpose. Holden, drawn to her broken allure, became the instrument she needed, a puppet unaware that the strings wrapped around him were soaked in poison. Together, they were recreating the same nightmare that had nearly torn Genoa City apart years ago, only this time, the target was Victor himself. The idea of Victor Newman, a man nearly untouchable, being in danger was almost absurd, yet Sharon knew too well that arrogance had been his downfall before. Claire's plan wasn't to strike with brute force, it was psychological warfare, the kind of attack that begins by dismantling trust. In the days that followed, Sharon observed the shift in the air. Noah had started to feel the pressure, though he couldn't yet see where it came from. Anonymous messages appeared in his inbox, cryptic notes implying betrayal, photos of him with people he hadn't seen in years, small distortions meant to unravel his sense of security. He grew paranoid, doubting friends, keeping his distance even from Sharon. That was part of the plan, isolation was always the first step. Holden played his role well, pretending to offer advice, feeding Noah's fears subtly until he began to second-guess his own reality. Claire stayed in the shadows, maintaining her distance while Sienna pulled strings behind the scenes. Sharon wanted to warn him, to run to Victor and tell him everything, but she hesitated. If she acted too soon, the trio would vanish, and she would lose her only chance at exposing them. Instead, Sharon chose patience, though it tore at her sanity. Each night she returned to the basement, documenting every movement, every fragment of conversation. The more she listened, the darker the plan became. It was no longer just about revenge, it was ritualistic, symbolic even. Claire spoke of cleansing bloodlines, of purging corruption from within. There was something almost religious in her madness, a devotion to the destruction she believed necessary to set things right. Sienna's approval gave her validation, while Holden's obedience gave her power. The mention of Victor's name became a kind of mantra, repeated with contempt, as if invoking it could erase decades of his influence. Sharon's heart ached as she realized the scale of their hatred. This wasn't about one family, it was about rewriting the power dynamic of an entire city. As she dug deeper, Sharon began to notice familiar tactics, hidden accounts, forged communications, corporate leaks, all reminiscent of Jordan's old schemes. It confirmed what she feared most: Jordan's legacy had survived through Claire. Whether biological or ideological, she was her mother's continuation, a new weapon forged from the ashes of the old. Victor had always believed he had buried his enemies. What he didn't realize was that they had been evolving in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Sharon understood now that warning him would not be enough. To stop them, she would have to dismantle the network itself, expose Sienna's manipulations, destroy Holden's illusions, and confront Claire for what she truly was: not a victim, not a prodigal daughter, but a predator born from vengeance. But time was slipping away. The more Sharon spied, the more dangerous it became. Sienna was too sharp. She began to sense inconsistencies, feeling the presence of someone unseen. One night, as Sharon waited behind the wall, she noticed Sienna's gaze linger on the door longer than usual. A faint smile touched her lips, not of amusement but of awareness. Sharon's pulse quickened. She knew she couldn't afford another visit. She needed allies, but who could she trust? Victor would act recklessly, Nick might not believe her, and Victoria, if she knew Claire wasn't her daughter, would be shattered. Sharon felt trapped between duty and danger. Meanwhile, Claire's descent into monstrosity was almost poetic in its cruelty. Freed from pretense, she became bold, ruthless, intoxicatingly confident. She no longer hid her contempt for the Newmans, she flaunted it. She told Holden that the family had built their empire on deceit and deserved to be erased. Sienna fueled her with stories, half-truths, and selective history, twisting her perception until vengeance became virtue. And Holden, lost in admiration, saw himself as her protector, unaware that in her eyes, he was expendable. Their partnership was doomed to implode, but before it did, it would burn everything around them. The day Claire revealed her true lineage, it was not to the world but to Sienna. She confessed that she had known all along she was Jordan's daughter. She had played the role of Victoria's child because it granted her access to power, to proximity, to the Newman empire that her mother once swore to destroy. Sharon learned this from the recordings she made that final week, fragments of a confession whispered in the dark. Claire's tone was devoid of emotion. It was not a revelation of guilt but of pride. Sienna, far from shocked, seemed almost pleased. It meant her investment had been well placed. Together, they toasted to the end of a dynasty that had ruled too long. In the weeks that followed, Sharon watched the city's undercurrents shift. Financial disruptions in Newman enterprises, false rumors in the press, sudden betrayals among allies, all orchestrated with surgical precision. The chaos spread silently, unnoticed by those too busy fighting their own small wars. Noah's world continued to collapse, and Victor, though suspicious, underestimated the depth of the threat. Sharon realized she could no longer wait. She gathered her evidence of photos, recordings, files, and prepared to confront the truth. But before she could act, the story took an even darker turn. One evening, the basement was empty. No Claire, no Holden, no Sienna. The walls had been stripped, the evidence gone. Sharon's hands shook as she scanned the room, her breath echoing in the hollow space. On the table lay a single photograph, a picture of Victor and Noah, marked with a red X across their faces. It was a message, not of intimidation but of inevitability. They knew she had been watching. They were letting her know she was next. Sharon fled, her instincts screaming that time was running out. The lines between hunter and hunted had blurred, and she could feel their eyes on her now. Somewhere in the city, Claire watched from a window overlooking the lights of Los Angeles, her reflection a ghost of the girl she once pretended to be. She thought of Jordan, of the promises whispered in childhood, of the vengeance she had inherited like a birthright. Sienna stood behind her, satisfied, certain that the plan was complete. But beneath that calm, there was something else, a flicker of fear. Because even monsters fear what they've created when it becomes too powerful to control. And Claire, with her quiet smile and hollow eyes, was no longer anyone's puppet. She had become something far worse, her mother's masterpiece.